It is the middle of the night. No woods, no hospital, no phone, just fire, sleeping bodies, and a newborn crying in your arms. 1 hour old, completely helpless, completely yours. That baby cannot regulate its temperature, cannot hold its own head, cannot survive 1 hour alone. And yet, every single one of your ancestors kept one alive. Thousands of generations, not one failure. That is not luck. A baby giraffe drops 6 feet to the ground at birth, lands, and trots within an hour. A baby horse stands in under 2. Our closest relatives grip their mother immediately. Human babies? Absolutely not. We are something different. We are completely, totally 100% dependent on other people for everything. Not for a week, for years. This is not a flaw. This is a trade-off, and it cost us something enormous to make it. Human brains are enormous. A fully developed brain at birth would require a skull too large to pass through the birth canal. So evolution made us give birth early. Too early. On purpose. That is the deal we made. At birth, our brain is 25% of its adult size. A chimp is born at 45. All that remaining development happens outside the womb, exposed, dependent, vulnerable. Years of it, in the open world. This is called the obstetric dilemma, and it means one thing above everything else. A human infant cannot survive alone, not even theoretically, not even for a few hours. The species requires social support to reproduce. Full stop. It takes a village to raise a child. You've heard it. You've seen it on bumper stickers. But in early human history, it was not a metaphor. It was a survival strategy, so effective it may explain why we are the only humans left on Earth. Anthropologists call it cooperative breeding. In most primates, one mother carries the full weight. Humans broke that completely. Childcare distributed across the entire group, not as a favor, as a biological strategy that defined the species. In groups like the AKA people of Central Africa, fathers are within arm's reach of their infants 47% of the time. 47%. That is more involved than most fathers in industrialized societies today. The social web around an ancient human child was dense, layered, redundant. No single adult was ever the sole point of failure. The child was never alone, always embedded in a network that considered its survival a shared responsibility. There is one person who played a disproportionate role in keeping ancient children alive. Not the mother, not the father, the grandmother, specifically the maternal grandmother. Science has a whole hypothesis about her. Human menopause may have evolved specifically so older women could stop reproducing and invest everything in grandchildren. Evolution decided experienced grandmothers were more valuable than more babies. Think about what that means. Studies of traditional societies show the presence of a maternal grandmother is one of the strongest predictors of whether a child survives past age 2. In some populations, it rivals the influence of the mother herself. She is the variable that changes everything. You are a hunter-gatherer mother. You must walk miles today over rough terrain. You cannot put the baby down. Predators exist. The baby cannot regulate temperature. A crying infant left alone is a signal to everything nearby that eats me. The solution ancient humans arrived at was elegant and is backed by extensive research. Carry the infant against the body constantly, all day, every day. What we now call baby wearing appears to be the biological default for our entire species. Touch the palm of a newborn, and they grip your finger with surprising force. That reflex evolved for clinging to a caregiver. Skin-to-skin contact regulates heart rate, breathing, temperature, stress hormones. Babies carried more cry, 50% less. Not personality, biology. In ancient human societies, breastfeeding continued 2 to 4 years, sometimes longer. The World Health Organization recommends up to age 2 or beyond. From an evolutionary standpoint, weaning before 2 would have been the strange choice. The dangerous one, wet nursing, breastfeeding someone else's child, appears to be ancient and cross-cultural. Multiple women in a group nursing children not their own. If one mother died, the child did not automatically die. The group's reproduction was not dependent on any single person's biology. Adults chewed food first, then transferred it to the infant's mouth. Premastication. It sounds alarming by modern standards, but some of those transferred bacteria supported immune development. Chimpanzees do it. It may be as old as our genus. It worked. Here is something that will change how you think about sleep forever. In every hunter-gatherer society ever studied, without a single exception, infants slept pressed against an adult body every single night. Not in a crib, not in a separate room, against a human. Every night, for the entire history of our species until about 5 minutes ago. Modern medicine has legitimate concerns about bed sharing. Soft mattresses, heavy blankets, exhausted parents, alcohol, these are real risk factors in real modern environments. Nobody serious is dismissing them. But here is what matters. Those risks are specific to modern conditions. The ancestral sleep environment looked completely different. Firm ground, sober caregivers, cool air, physical contact that regulated everything. James McKenna is an anthropologist who has spent decades studying how infants sleep. His research suggests something remarkable. When an infant sleeps next to a breathing, moving adult, the adult's breathing pattern actually helps regulate the infant's own breathing. During a developmental window, when that regulation is still unreliable, the body next to the baby is doing invisible work all night long. Let's be completely honest about what the numbers actually looked like. In Paleolithic populations, somewhere between 30 and 50% of children died before age 5. That is not a typo. Between 1 in 3 and 1 in 2 children. Gone before their 5th birthday. Ancient humans did everything right that they could do and still lost half their children. Not because they failed, because they had no antibiotics, no vaccines, no germ theory, nothing. Here is the part that surprises people. The grief was real. Archaeologists have found infant burials arranged with obvious care. Flowers placed on small bodies. Grave goods tucked beside tiny hands. Objects that meant something to someone. These were not statistics to the people living through them. These were children. The archaeological record says clearly, they mourned. Exactly the way you would mourn. Medicinal plant use is not a modern discovery. Chimpanzees self-medicate with specific plants in the wild. They seek out particular leaves and roots when they are sick. The archaeological record shows deliberate herb use in humans going back at least 50,000 years. 50,000. Ancient humans were building a pharmacopoeia long before anyone could write it down or explain why it worked. Willow bark, the original aspirin, used for pain and fever management for thousands of years before anyone understood the chemistry behind it. Honey used as an antimicrobial wound treatment in ancient Egypt and almost certainly much earlier. Garlic with genuine antimicrobial properties that ancient people had identified empirically. None of this stopped meningitis, but none of it was nothing either. It was the beginning of something. Every single human culture ever documented has ceremonies around birth and early childhood. Naming rituals, protective charms, prayers over newborns, rites of passage. Everyone, no exceptions across thousands of cultures across every continent over all of recorded history. That pattern is not coincidence. That pattern is function. These rituals were doing something real, even when the people performing them could not explain why. The rituals served 3 real functions that anthropologists have identified. First, they bound community together around the child, making the child's survival a shared public concern. Second, they assigned specific responsibility for the child to specific people by name. Third, they gave people a psychological framework for processing grief when children died, which happened often. The ritual was infrastructure, hidden infrastructure that held everything together. Now here's the part of this story that most people do not expect. Some of what ancient humans did to keep children alive was actually more effective than what we replaced it with. Not the medicine, not the mortality rates. Modern medicine wins those by an enormous margin. But the behavioral infrastructure, the social and emotional environment built around children, that is where the comparison gets genuinely uncomfortable for modern people to look at. Let's talk about what actually changed and when. For most of human history, families lived embedded in extended networks. Grandparents nearby, aunts and uncles nearby, older cousins nearby, multiple generations within walking distance of each other. Then industrialization happened. Then urbanization. Then the two-income household became necessary. Then geographic mobility for work. And the extended family network quietly collapsed without anyone deciding to collapse it. In many Western countries today, a new mother comes home from the hospital and the door closes. And it stays closed. Maybe a partner is there. Maybe not. Maybe family is nearby. Usually not. Maybe friends visit in the first weeks. And then life moves on for everyone except the new parent, who is now alone with something that requires the equivalent of a 24-hour shift every single day, indefinitely, with no days off and no backup. The rates of postpartum depression in industrialized societies are documented and remarkably high. Estimates suggest between 10 and 15% of mothers experience clinical postpartum depression. Some studies put it higher, and that is only the clinical cases, the ones that get counted. The exhaustion, the isolation, the feeling that something is wrong that nobody can name, that goes far wider than any statistic captures. Infant sleep disorders are another well-documented modern phenomenon. Parents searching desperately for solutions, buying white noise machines, blackout curtains, special mattresses, sleep training programs. Entire industries built around a problem that hunter-gatherer parents did not have, because the solution was a human body next to the baby, and that cost nothing, and it worked, and we replaced it with a market. Parental burnout is real, documented, and increasing in industrialized societies. The research is clear. And when you actually look at the structure ancient human parents operated in versus the structure modern parents operate in, the reason is not a mystery. Ancient parents had distributed exhaustion. Modern parents have concentrated exhaustion. One person or two people absorbing everything that used to be spread across 10. Here is something worth sitting with. The human nervous system of a newborn does not know what century it was born into. It does not know about industrialization. It does not know about nuclear families or apartment buildings or the gig economy. It knows exactly one thing: whether or not there is a warm human body nearby. That is the only input it has been designed, across 300,000 years, to receive. Let's talk about the birth spacing finding because it matters more than most people realize. In hunter-gatherer populations, children are naturally spaced 3 to 4 years apart, not by choice or planning, by biology. Extended high-frequency breastfeeding suppresses ovulation. The woman's own body creates the gap because the biology knows something. Trying to carry two completely dependent children simultaneously was a survival threat to both of them. Bone marrow. This is something most people have never thought about as food for children. But in hunter-gatherer societies, it was one of the first solid foods given to infants and toddlers. Crack open a long bone, and inside is one of the most calorie-dense, fat-rich, nutrient-packed substances that exists in nature. Easy to eat with no teeth. Available whenever an animal was hunted. The original baby food. And it was genuinely excellent nutrition. Hunter-gatherer children had better teeth than Bronze-Age children. Let that sit for a moment. The people living 10,000 years before dentistry existed, who had never heard of fluoride, who had no toothbrushes, who ate with their hands on the ground, their children had better dental health than the children who came after them. The reason is straightforward. They ate everything. The Bronze Age children ate mostly bread. Variety 1. The grasping reflex. Every parent knows it, but most have never thought about what it actually is. You touch the palm of a newborn, and the hand closes. Immediately, instinctively, with surprising force. Pediatricians test for it at birth. But here's what it actually is. It is a vestigial behavior from a time when infants needed to cling physically to a moving caregiver or fall. The reflex evolved for clinging. The crib made it vestigial. Skin-to-skin contact between a caregiver and newborn stabilizes 4 separate physiological systems simultaneously. Heart rate, breathing rhythm, body temperature, cortisol levels, that is stress hormones. For systems, all regulated by one thing: Physical contact with another human body. Not a machine, not a device, not a monitor. A body, the thing that was always there. The thing we keep trying to replace with technology. Here is a number. In societies where infants are carried throughout the day in constant physical contact with a caregiver, infant crying drops by approximately 50% compared to societies where babies spend significant time alone. 50%. This is not a small finding. Infant crying is the #1 reported cause of parental stress in the first year. Having it would change the entire experience of early parenthood. The Aka people of Central Africa are one of the most studied hunter-gatherer groups in the world. Researchers who have spent time with them describe a childcare environment almost impossible to imagine by Western standards. Infants passed between adults constantly, never alone, never crying without an immediate response. Fathers present and engaged in ways that Western developmental psychology spent decades telling parents was optional. It was not optional. It was the baseline. There's a concept in engineering called a single point of failure. It means a component in a system whose failure causes the entire system to fail. The modern nuclear family with 2 working parents and no nearby extended family is, in child-rearing terms, a system with a single point of failure. Ancient human child-rearing was specifically and deliberately engineered to have none. Every function had redundancy. Every role had backup. The system survived loss because it was built to. Let's address the counterargument directly. Some people hear all of this and think, but infant mortality was terrible in the ancient world, so clearly they were doing something wrong. No, the high mortality was from infection, from bacteria, from parasites, from injuries with no treatment. The behavioral childcare was working, the social systems were working. What was missing was germ theory and antibiotics. Those are separate problems with separate solutions. Modern child mortality has dropped by 96% since 1800. 96. This is one of the most extraordinary achievements in human history, and it deserves to be said without qualification. Vaccines, clean water, antibiotics, neonatal intensive care. These are not debatable. They are unambiguously, completely, without any asterisk whatsoever, among the best things humanity has ever accomplished. Full stop. Nobody sane is arguing otherwise. The but comes here. Within the domain of behavioral childcare, the social, emotional, and physical environment we build around children, industrialized societies have quietly, without planning, without deciding, dismantled structures that were doing important work. Not because anyone chose to hurt children, because economic forces moved faster than anyone noticed what was being lost. And what was lost is only now becoming visible in the data. The bouncer, the swing, the playmat, the activity gym, the door bouncer, the bassinet, the vibrating chair. Each of these products was invented to solve a real problem. How do you keep a baby content and safe without holding it? Each one is a workaround for the absence of a village. Each one is a product born from the fact that there is only one adult and they need their hands free. The product exists because the system broke. The separate nursery became standard in Western homes in the 20th century. Before that, in the vast majority of human cultures, the idea of putting an infant in a separate room alone would have seemed not just unusual, but genuinely alarming. The separate nursery is a product of architecture, of larger homes, of privacy as a cultural value. It is not a product of child development research. It came first. The research came after and mostly found problems with it. Sleep training. There are many versions, and some are gentler than others. But the underlying goal of most sleep training methods is the same: to get the infant to stop signaling for a caregiver at night, to self-soothe. From an evolutionary standpoint, self-soothing in an infant is not a developmental achievement. It is an infant that has learned that signaling does not bring a response. The signal stops. The need does not. Here is what the thread actually is across all of this. Every single practice we have discussed, the carrying, the nursing, the co-sleeping, the pre-mastication, the wet nursing, the grandmother, the cooperative group, every single one of them has one thing in common. They all put more human contact around the child. More bodies, more attention, more presence. The answer was always more people. The problem was always isolation. 300,000 years, consistent finding. Children survived when they were embedded in social connection. Children struggled when they were isolated. This is the single most consistent finding across every culture, every time period, every geography. It predates agriculture. It predates writing. It predates cities. It predates everything we think of as civilization, and is still true right now, today, in every peer-reviewed study on child development published this year. We have built extraordinary physical safety for children. Car seats, outlet covers, baby monitors, helmets, pool fences, safety latches, smoke detectors. The physical environment around children in industrialized countries is safer than it has ever been in human history. We are remarkable at physical safety. The question is whether we have matched that achievement with equal attention to the social and emotional environment. The evidence suggests we have not. The data on loneliness and social isolation in industrialized countries is not about children specifically, but it connects to everything we have discussed. Adults who are isolated have worse health outcomes. Adults who have strong social networks live longer. The immune system responds to social connection. The cardiovascular system responds to social connection. The same biology that made infants need a village also makes adults need a village. The village was not just for the children. None of this is a moral judgment on modern parents. That needs to be said clearly and then said again. Parents in industrialized societies are doing their absolute best inside a structure that was not designed with child development in mind. The structure was designed by economic forces, housing markets, employment patterns, cultural values around privacy and independence. Nobody sat down and said, let's make parenting impossible. They just built the world and parenting got caught in it. What would actually help is worth asking directly. Not as a policy prescription, just as an observation from the data. More adults around young children. Parental leave that is long enough to matter. Workplace flexibility for parents. Affordable childcare staffed by people who are paid like the work is important. Grandparents who live close enough to be useful. Communities organized around families rather than organized around individuals who happen to have families. The grandmother hypothesis has a deeper implication that most people miss. It is not just about grandmothers helping with childcare. It is about the evolutionary value of accumulated experience. Older humans are not evolutionary leftovers. They are not past their useful date. They are repositories of information and skill that cannot be replicated any other way. The older adult in the group was the library, the walking database, and we have spent the last century building systems that treat them as optional. Here is something that should be more widely known. The human female is one of very few species on Earth that experiences menopause. Most female mammals reproduce until they die. The fact that human women live for decades past their reproductive years is biologically unusual enough that it demands an explanation. The grandmother hypothesis is the leading scientific explanation. You stop having babies so you could protect the ones that were already here. Cooperative breeding may be one of the reasons Homo sapiens outlasted every other human species on Earth. Neanderthals, Denisovans, Homo erectus, Homo heidelbergensis, all gone. We are the only humans left. The leading theories for why involve brain size and language. But cooperative breeding deserves a place in that conversation. A species that distributes child rearing across the group can grow faster, sustain larger populations, and survive losses that would collapse a species with solo rearing mothers. Let's talk about what we actually know about early human social groups. Hunter-gatherer bands typically numbered between 20 and 50 individuals, not hundreds. Not thousands. 20 to 50 people who knew each other completely, depended on each other entirely, and had been together long enough to have accumulated shared knowledge across generations. Every child in that group was known by every adult, by name, by face, by the story of their birth. There is a hypothesis in evolutionary psychology called the environment of evolutionary adaptedness. It refers to the conditions under which a species evolved and, therefore, the conditions its biology is calibrated for. For humans, that environment involved small bands, constant social contact, extended family networks, outdoor exposure, varied diet, physical activity, and children embedded in multigenerational community. We have changed almost every one of those variables. The biology has not changed at all. Physical contact is not just comfort. This is a point worth spending time on. Researchers studying premature infants in neonatal units found that premature babies held skin to skin by a parent, what they call kangaroo care, had significantly better outcome than those kept in incubators alone, even with identical medical treatment. Temperature, weight gain, infection rates, length of hospital stay. The body next to the body was doing measurable, medical, documented work. The cortisol finding deserves its own moment. Cortisol is the primary stress hormone. Chronically elevated cortisol in infants is associated with long-term changes to brain development, immune function, and stress response systems. Physical contact with a caregiver reduces cortisol levels in infants measurably and quickly. An infant in extended isolation is not just unhappy. Its stress response system is being calibrated by that isolation. The calibration lasts a long time. There is a finding in developmental psychology called the still face experiment. A parent interacts normally with an infant, then holds a completely neutral, expressionless face for 2 minutes. Within seconds, the infant begins trying to re-engage the parent. Pointing, reaching, vocalizing. When none of that works, the infant becomes distressed, turns away, and shows physical signs of stress. 2 minutes of an unresponsive face. That is all it takes. Response. That word matters. Ancient human infants received an immediate response to every signal. Not because ancient parents were philosophically committed to responsive parenting, because there was always someone close enough to respond. The physical proximity of multiple adults guaranteed responsiveness as a structural feature of the environment, not as a parenting choice. Modern responsive parenting is trying to recreate by individual effort what proximity used to guarantee automatically. Ancient human mothers did not experience postpartum the way modern Western mothers often do. Not because ancient life was easier, it was catastrophically harder in most ways. But the specific cocktail of factors that produces modern postpartum depression, isolation, sleep deprivation beyond what is manageable, lack of support, physical separation from community, these were structural features of the modern situation that simply did not exist in the ancestral environment. The village was the treatment. We removed the treatment. Something worth acknowledging directly. The practices we have been describing, extended breastfeeding, co-sleeping, constant carrying, wet nursing, these are the global norm. Right now, today, not the historical norm, the current global norm. The majority of the world's parents practice most of these things. What is unusual from a global perspective is not these practices. What is unusual is the Western industrialized approach to infant care. We're the outlier, not them. There is a concept worth introducing here: alloparenting. It refers to care of offspring by individuals other than the biological parents. In cooperative breeding species, alloparenting is the norm. Humans are one of the most cooperative alloparenting species that exists. Other alloparenting species include elephants, meerkats, wolves, and certain bird species. We are an interesting company. The commonality: all of them live in tight social groups where offspring care is shared. All of them. Ancient human knowledge transmission worked differently than we might assume. There were no books, no schools, no internet. Knowledge lived in people. Specifically, it lived in older people who had survived long enough to accumulate it. Across cultures, the elders of a community were the information system. The library, the database, the search engine, all of it was human memory, held by the oldest members, transmitted by observation and repetition and story. When an elder died, a library burned. The obstetric dilemma created something else besides vulnerable infants. It created the need for assisted birth. Human birth is uniquely dangerous compared to other primates. The skull of the infant is large relative to the birth canal, and the infant must rotate during delivery in a way no other primate does. This means that unassisted birth in humans is significantly more risky than other species. Midwives and birth attendants appear to be among the oldest specialized roles in human society. The village was there at the beginning, too. The archaeological evidence for grief over infant death is worth spending more time on because it contradicts a persistent myth. The myth says ancient people were hardened to infant death because it happened so often. The evidence says the opposite. Infant burials from the Upper Paleolithic, 50,000 years ago, showed deliberate, careful arrangement of bodies. Ochre placed around the burial. Animal teeth as ornaments. Flower pollen. These are not the actions of people who did not care. These are the actions of people who cared enormously and lost anyway. Cross-cultural surveys of infant care have found one variable more predictive of infant well-being than almost any other: the number of caregiving adults regularly in contact with the infant. Not the quality of any individual caregiver. The number. More caregiving adults means better infant outcomes across almost every measure studied. Heart rate, weight gain, developmental milestones. The finding is consistent enough that some researchers have called it the most robust finding in infant care research. The question of what to do with this information is genuinely difficult. You cannot simply recreate a hunter-gatherer social structure inside a modern city. People have jobs. Families are scattered. Privacy is valued. Life is structured around the individual in ways that are deep and largely irreversible. But knowing the gap exists is different from not knowing. And some of the gap can be closed. Not all of it. Some of it. By people who now understand what was lost and why it mattered. Parents who feel isolated, exhausted, and overwhelmed are not failing. They are functioning exactly as a poorly designed system produces functioning. The system is what failed, not the person inside it. This distinction matters more than it might seem, because a person who believes they are failing looks for ways to be better. A person who understands a system is broken looks for ways to fix the system. One of those leads somewhere. The other leads to a spiral. The social technology that ancient humans built, the cooperative childcare network, the distributed responsibility, the redundant system of care, this was not accidental. It was built over hundreds of thousands of years of selection pressure. Families and groups that had better social infrastructure had more surviving children. The infrastructure improved over generations because the groups with worse infrastructure had fewer children who survived to pass it on. Evolution built the village, not as an option, as a requirement. Here's a question worth asking. When we talk about child development in modern contexts, pediatric visits, parenting books, development apps, sleep consultants, how much of that advice is calibrated to the ancestral environment that produced the child's nervous system? The honest answer is not much. Most modern child development advice is calibrated to a two-parent household in an industrialized country with a crib and a 9-to-5 job. That is a very specific and very recent set of conditions. The feeding frequency finding is worth returning to. Hunter-gatherer mothers breastfeeding up to 4 times per hour in the early months. That is not a typo. 4 times per hour. This constant feeding suppresses ovulation, naturally spaces births, provides continuous small calories rather than large occasional ones. It means the infant is never far from the mother for more than 15 minutes. The feeding schedule was also the proximity schedule. It was also the contraception schedule. 3 functions, 1 behavior. Here is a fact about hunter-gatherer populations that tends to surprise people. Women in hunter-gatherer societies have significantly fewer lifetime pregnancies than women in early agricultural societies. Counterintuitive, right? But it follows directly from the birth spacing we discussed. Extended high-frequency breastfeeding delays the return of ovulation by years. A hunter-gatherer woman might have 4 or 5 pregnancies in her lifetime. An early agricultural woman, who weans much earlier, might have 8 or 9. More pregnancies is not the same as more surviving children. Let's talk about what crying actually is from an evolutionary perspective. An infant cry is not a manipulation. It is not a bad habit being formed. It is a distress signal evolved specifically to produce a response in nearby adults. The signal is aversive by design. It is unpleasant to hear because unpleasant signals get responses. Ignoring the signal does not teach the infant anything useful. It teaches the signal that it is not connected to a response, which is a lesson with consequences. There is a word that appears repeatedly in the research on infant development: contingency. Contingent response. It means when the infant signals, the environment responds. Not sometimes, consistently. The contingency, the reliable connection between signal and response, is what the developing nervous system is using to build its model of the world. A world that responds contingently is a world that is navigable. A world that does not respond is a world that cannot be predicted, cannot be trusted, cannot be navigated safely. Ancient humans accumulated knowledge over generations through a process we rarely appreciate properly: trial and error across thousands of years. A plant that helped sick children got used again. A plant that did not help or caused harm stopped being used. A practice that improved survival got taught to the next generation. A practice that did not eventually disappeared. There was no scientific method. There was something older and in some ways more patient: time. And time is a very good filter. The weaning transition in hunter-gatherer societies happened differently than the abrupt modern version. Children gradually took on more solid food, while nursing continued in parallel, the two overlapping for months or years. The infant's digestive system, immune system, and social development all shifted gradually during this overlap period. Modern weaning, happening earlier and more abruptly, compresses a transition that the biology was designed to take years. The compression is fast. The nervous system is not. The diet of hunter-gatherer children was remarkably varied by necessity. Whatever the group found or hunted that day: seasonal berries, roots, tubers, nuts, eggs, insects, fish, game, honey, seeds, leaves. The variety was not a nutritional strategy. It was the absence of specialization. And the absence of specialization turned out to be excellent nutrition. The gut microbiome of hunter-gatherers, studied in modern populations, shows greater diversity than industrialized populations. Diversity appears to be what the gut was designed for. There are researchers today working in something called evolutionary medicine, using evolutionary history to understand modern disease. The central insight is simple. Diseases that are common in modern industrialized populations but rare or absent in hunter-gatherer populations deserve evolutionary explanation. The list is long. Type 2 diabetes, many autoimmune conditions, certain mental health conditions, specific sleep disorders. The evolutionary lens does not give you all the answers, but it asks better questions. The immune system finding around pre-mastication is worth dwelling on. The human immune system does not come pre-programmed. It learns. In the early years of life, it is actively calibrating itself based on what it encounters. The hypothesis is that exposure to a caregiver's oral microbiome through pre-masticated food or close contact provides a training dataset for the infant's developing immune system. The caregiver's microbiome, having survived in the same environment, is relevant data. The immune system is taking notes. Somewhere around 10,000 years ago, agriculture changed everything. Not immediately, not all at once, but the shift from hunting and gathering to farming gradually concentrated populations, changed diets toward grain dependence, changed social structures, reduced mobility, and began the long process of reshaping the conditions under which children were raised. The hunter-gatherer behavioral system did not disappear overnight. It faded, slowly, over generations, until it was gone without anyone noticing it had ever been there. The nuclear family as we know it, two adults, their children, living in one household largely separated from extended kin, is historically very unusual. For most of human history, it did not exist as the primary unit of child rearing. Extended family compounds, tribal camps, multi-generational households, these were the norm. The nuclear family became primary in the West in the 20th century, driven by urbanization, wage labor, and mobility. It is one of the youngest social structures in human history, and we built our entire parenting industry around it. There's something quietly revolutionary about the grandmother hypothesis that gets missed. It implies that human females evolved to be valuable after reproduction. In most evolutionary frameworks, post-reproductive individuals are just survivors. In the grandmother hypothesis, post-reproductive females are a design feature of the species. Evolution kept them alive on purpose, because their value is not behind them. It was in front of them. In the grandchildren, they would spend the next 20 or 30 years protecting. Let's return to the number that started this video. 300,000 years. That is how long our species has been doing this. 300,000 years of infant mortality hovering between 30 and 50%. 300,000 years of trying everything available and losing children anyway. 300,000 years of grief and learning and passing knowledge forward. And then, in the last 200 years, a 96% reduction in child mortality. The oldest problem in human history almost solved in 200 years. That is extraordinary. And yet, children are physically safer than they have ever been. And parents are more burned out than they have ever been. Children are less likely to die. And parents are more isolated than they have ever been. Children receive more intentional, researched, optimized individual parenting than any children in history. And rates of childhood anxiety and depression are climbing. The physical problem was solved. The social problem was not. And it turns out the social problem was also a health problem. The thread that runs through all 300,000 years of this is not complicated when you finally see it. Children need people, not equipment, not schedules, not optimized sleep environments, not research-backed solo play. People, specifically multiple people who are physically present, emotionally available, and reliably responsive. That is what the nervous system was designed to receive. Everything else is a workaround built for a world that removed the people. We have built extraordinary technology for keeping children physically safe. We have made remarkable progress against the biological threats that once killed half of all children. That is genuinely, profoundly, completely good. But the social technology, the dense, overlapping, distributed network of human care the species spent hundreds of thousands of years building. That is the part we are still figuring out how to preserve. The ancient humans did not have antibiotics. What they had was each other. If you take one thing from this, let it be this. The exhaustion parents feel is not a character flaw. The isolation new mothers experience is not weakness. The overwhelming difficulty of raising children in modern industrial conditions is not evidence that the parents are doing it wrong. It is evidence that the system was designed for something completely different. The system that worked was built on other people being there. When other people are not there, the system does not work. That is a systems problem, not a people problem. The question this video ends on is not a comfortable one. We have solved the biological threats to children. We have not solved the social architecture. We know what the social architecture looked like because we can see it in hunter-gatherer populations, in archaeological evidence, in developmental psychology research, in evolutionary biology. We know what worked. The question is not what worked. The question is whether we will build for it, whether we will design cities, workplaces, parental policies, and communities with the actual human nervous system in mind. 300,000 years of ancestors. Every single one of them kept someone alive long enough to have you. Not alone, not as a couple, as a group. The village kept you alive. Not metaphorically. The village is why you exist. Somewhere in that chain of 300,000 years is a grandmother who stayed awake when she was exhausted. A neighbor who carried a baby that was not hers. An uncle who fed a child he did not father. That is the chain you're standing at the end of. That is who you come from. The ancient answer to how do you keep a child alive was never a technique. It was never a method or a schedule or a program or a product. The answer was, you do not do it alone. You do not even primarily do it as a couple. You do it as a group. You share the load. You distribute the exhaustion. You make sure no single adult is ever the sole point of failure in a child's survival. 300,000 years. One answer. Consistent. Every culture. Every time. Every geography. The group. They carry them constantly. They breastfed them for years. They slept next to them every night. They chew their food for them. They surrounded them with a web of attentive adults who took genuine responsibility for each child's welfare. They mourned when children died, which happened often. They tried to understand illness with the tools they had. They developed rituals to hold communities together in the face of grief. They accumulated knowledge across generations and passed it forward. They did not do it alone. We have built extraordinary things. We really have. The collapse of child mortality in the 20th century is one of humanity's genuine miracles. The scientific method applied to child health saved hundreds of millions of lives in one century. That achievement deserves to be said clearly and without qualification every time we have this conversation. And then, with equal clarity, we need to ask the next question. We solved the biology. Did we remember the community? Because the community was always doing half the work. The children who made it through 300,000 years of human history did not survive because their parents had the right products. They survived because they were held, because they were carried, because they were responded to, because they were surrounded by people who treated their survival as a shared responsibility and meant it. The body that holds the infant, the grandmother who stays awake, the neighbor who carries a child not hers. These are not nice things to have. These are what the species runs on. The ancient humans did not have antibiotics. They did not have ultrasounds. They did not have formula or pediatricians or car seats or baby monitors or temperature control nurseries. They did not have any of the things we reach for first when we think about keeping children safe. What they had was each other. And for 300,000 years, inside all the grief and the loss and the darkness of a world without medicine, that was enough. It kept the chain unbroken, all the way to you.